Hello and welcome to a special edition of Black Nouveau. I'm Joanne Williams. Last week, 1036 aired its first edition of Listen MKE. Listen MKE is a community project of the Ideas Lab of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, WUWM 89.7, Milwaukee's NPR, the Milwaukee Public Library, and Milwaukee PBS. The purpose is to create listening opportunities for folks living on the north side of the city. The first program focused on the protests after the murder of George Floyd. Two community activists spoke passionately about the protests and the change that they want to see. We'll talk about some of those proposed changes with Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett and Milwaukee County Sheriff Earnell Lucas. You know, a lot of things have changed since our last broadcast. The stay-at-home restrictions have been eased, businesses are reopening, but a lot of people have stopped social distancing. Historian Reggie Jackson says that's a real problem. He talked with our Everett Marshburn.
Thanks, Joanne. We're joined now by columnist and historian Reggie Jackson. Reggie, you mentioned a number of important issues in your Milwaukee Independent newspaper column. Let's talk about a couple of them. For example, your column after Memorial Day, you found a lot of people not socially distancing themselves. Did that really surprise you?
You know, Everett, seeing people not socially distancing at that particular time didn't come as a surprise to me at all. I pretty much expected it. You know, people have been locked in place for a significant amount of time and they're stir crazy and they want to get back to a normal kind of state of mind. But what I talked about in the column is that, you know, the normal that we're trying to get back to is not the normal anymore. You know, this virus is not going to go away because we want it to go away. And that, you know, even though the restrictions from the state have been lifted, we still have to be very vigilant as a community, as individuals, to protect ourselves and most importantly, to protect the other people around us.
You called it a paradox.
Yeah, you know, there's this thing where, you know, as Americans, I always say that we're the most spoiled of the spoiled, right? And so we have this invisible enemy, this little virus that we can't see without a microscope, that we've been in this battle with for several months. And people were more concerned about the loss of, you know, their freedoms to move around and go to the bars and restaurants. They were more concerned about that than they were about the continual growth in the number of people who are passing away from this virus. I mean, it's strange that we can so easily forget that people are getting sick from this virus, getting very ill. People are still dying, and our concern has shifted from being concerned about that to being concerned about, hey, man, the weather is warming up. I want to get back to, you know, going out and hanging out with friends. And, you know, the paradox is that we want to have it both ways. We want to be safe, but we want to have fun. And, you know, this is not a time for us to let down our guard.
Well, during the protest, though, we've seen a lot of people who are still involved in the protest but socially distancing.
Yeah, you know, it's difficult to social distance when you're in a crowd of, you know, 1,000 people, right? But I've seen a lot of people with masks on. I've seen a lot of people and even had conversations with people who've been part of some of the protests talk about, you know, them attempting to do social distancing. You know, I think that it says a lot, Everett, that people are willing to risk being exposed to the coronavirus because they feel so strongly about what's going on with the George Floyd murder in Minneapolis, that they're willing to risk their lives to speak their minds by being a part of these protests. I think that says a lot about kind of the heart that people have right now. And I think, unfortunately, some people are going to live to regret this, because I think that the virus has probably looked at us and said, wow, you guys are doing the exact opposite of what you should be doing. Thank you very much. We can spread much more easily. And I think that over the next month or so, we're going to see the results of the lack of social distancing. I feel great that people are protesting. I feel wonderful that it's such a diverse group of people. I feel great that those protests are spread around the world. That makes me feel really great, very warm and fuzzy on the inside. But at the same time, I cringe thinking of what it'll mean in terms of the coronavirus.
I understand that, but you also think that the proof will be in the pudding. That is to say that even though this has been, in many ways, a more forceful protest than we've seen before, that we still have to wait to see what kind of results we may get.
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of expectations right now because of the protest. A lot of demands have been made. A lot of, statements have been made by officials. Some police departments have made, these grand statements. Minneapolis said they're going to disband their police department. A lot of things are expected as a result of the protests, especially because they've been so widespread. People think that because of the widespread nature of the protests, that obviously something had to change, right? But I keep telling people, I learned this as a little boy, Everett, living in Mississippi. I used to hear grown folks say, the proof is in the pudding. And, until I see actual changes happen, then I'm not going to believe it, because I know that, these institutions, the criminal justice system, our police departments are huge, huge institutions. Even small police departments are huge in their own communities. And large institutions don't make changes all that easily, and certainly don't make them all that quickly. I had a conversation with someone earlier about the Milwaukee Police Department. And what people have forgotten is that in 2015, the Department of Justice was here in Milwaukee and did an investigation of the Milwaukee Police Department. They offered dozens of recommendations to improve the Milwaukee Police Department that have not been acted on. In addition to that, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against the Milwaukee Police Department, and a judge ordered the Milwaukee Police Department to make some very specific changes. Many of those have not been acted upon for a variety of reasons. So until I actually start to see changes happen, and one of the changes I mentioned is that when I talk to Black folks in the community, I want to hear from them that the police are acting differently, that they're treating them with more respect, that they're not making them get out of their car and sit on the sidewalk, that they're not talking to them in a disrespectful way. Those are the things that I think would be proof to me that things are changing. The big institutional changes that people are calling for, they have to understand you have to be patient. And as soon as we have another case where another Black person who is unarmed is killed by police, and it's going to happen, Everett. We know it's going to happen. People are going to say, see, all of the protests were a waste of time. They haven't changed, without understanding that change is incremental. It happens at a snail's pace when it comes to big institutions. I always say that the only constant in life is change, but that change doesn't happen quickly enough for most people.
That sounds like a historian talking.
The Listen MKE webcast and the 1036 broadcast feature James Causey of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and Taryn Powell, the race and ethnicity reporter for WUWM. They talked with Marquesa Tucker, the director of the African American Roundtable, and Pastor Walter Lanier of the Progressive Baptist Church.
Last year, the African American Roundtable started a campaign called Liber8 MKE. We launched it last year on Juneteenth, and we just pretty much the coalition of folks on the core team of the African American Roundtable tried to figure out what can we organize around together. So many of us are doing so many things, around jails, around healthcare, all sorts of topics. But what was one thing that we could agree on and build on? And we all agreed that the police budget was completely unjust and out of whack. And so once we went and looked at it and started to share that information with people, realizing that the city budget was almost 50% of the entire city budget.
If the people who were in the seats of power had the capacity and the will to make these changes, they would have been made already. They have not been made. So either A, they lack the capacity to do it, or B, they lack the will to do it, but it's not been done. And so it's got to come from a different place.
We are now joined by the mayor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, James.
So let's get started. Can you tell me what percentage of the city budget does the police department take up each year?
It's about $300 million, and our operating budget is certainly north of $600 million. But I think the figure that probably is more stark to most people, including myself, is that the budget for the Milwaukee Police Department exceeds the entire property tax levy for the city of Milwaukee. And that has occurred for approximately the last 4 years in a row. And a lot of this is attributable to the fact that our ability to raise money from other sources is really hampering our efforts to do more in the human service area, for example, in the public health arena. I've been very active in trying to get more revenue from the state, either through shared revenue or through a sales tax, so that we can deal with some of the issues in addition to the police budget.
So now MPD is requesting a budget increase of 6% for next year. That would take funding from roughly $300 million in 2020 to $316 million in 2021. And that's only just to maintain what they're doing now. Will you approve that increase?
I think that there is a lot of work to be done between now and then. And that's one of the things I want to do. I want to engage the community to review the police budget, how the money is spent, and the functions that the police are currently performing that might be performed by somebody else. You've already seen the conversations about police in schools and the school board getting ready to not have police in schools. I think there's questions as to what role the police should play in mental health calls, for example. And a lot of that pertains to the county and what facilities are available at the county. So I think it's far too early to say that they're going to get any increase. What I will say is last year they had an increase, I think of maybe $4 or $5 million, and I might be wrong, but a $4 or $5 million increase translated into a reduction in strength from 1,864 police to 1,804. So even though they got several $1 million in additional money, it was 60 fewer officers. And a lot of that, and this is as we have this very, very important conversation, which I think is overdue, a lot of that is because of the state laws that basically tie our hands in our ability to control some of these costs. In other words, the state legislature determines how much money we get through shared revenue. They put a cap on how much we can raise in property taxes. They set the rules for the negotiations with the police officers, and then we're essentially left to pay those. So these are really, really important questions, and I'm pleased to have so much interest in this issue because it's something that I've been focusing on for a long time.
Yeah, so let's get into the demands of the African American Roundtable. They want officials to remove $75 million from the police budget and put $50 million towards public health efforts and another $25 million towards housing cooperatives. Is that possible to do?
Well, I think, again, what most people don't recognize is that the lion's share of costs in the police department are personnel costs. And I'm going to say between 91 to 94%. And again, we've got roughly 1,800 police officers, and the budget's $300 million. So if you take $75 million out of a $300 million budget, that's a 25% cut. And I would be hard pressed to think that most people want to see us have 400 fewer cops. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know that that's the case. What I think I hear most often from people is they want to see better trained police officers. They do want to see issues like mental health. They want to see issues like the school discipline. They want to see other avenues there. But my experience, and I'm interested in your reaction, is the major complaints that I get are people say that they're not treated well by the police, and the police don't respond to the calls quickly enough. And so how do we balance those two? And obviously, I want everybody to be treated well by the police. So I'm not talking about balancing that portion of it. That's a given. That's something that we have to come to grips with as a city, as a nation, as a society, that people are respected by our police. But there's a second issue, and that is, if there is a domestic abuse call, do we want the police to respond to that, or do we want someone else to respond to that? If there are shots fired, do we want the police to respond to that? Reckless driving, do we want the police to respond to that? those are all really, really important conversations that I think we need to have as a community.
Right. Another demand of the roundtable gets back to how do we discipline or fire officers convicted of, wrongdoing. In the case of Michael Mattioli, who was charged with first-degree reckless homicide after he put Joel Escovedo in a fatal chokehold back in April, he has not been fired yet. And you wanted him fired.
I have numerous times called for him to be fired, numerous times called for him to be fired, and I still want him to be fired. This is a man who's been charged with homicide.
Right.
And we're still paying him. It's offensive on so many different fronts that an individual who's being charged with homicide is still being paid. And that applies to, I think, any job. I can't think of any job in this city where someone who was charged with homicide would continue to be paid. And so there's an issue here, and the issue is, should the chief fire him? Should the Fire and Police Commission fire him? My view is, whether it's the chief or the Fire and Police Commission, he should be terminated. That's very clear.
Take me through the process. What's the process for firing officers in Milwaukee?
Under Section 6250 of the state statutes, the chief does have authority to fire. What happened in this case is, because there was obviously the police department involved, the Fire and Police Commission made the decision that it wanted to continue the investigation. The initial investigation, the criminal investigation, was done by the district attorney's office. That led to the charges against Officer Mattioli. In my mind, that was an adequate investigation that could be adopted to form the basis for terminating his employment. I think that that's an adequate basis. That's my personal belief. Once the Fire and Police Commission took that over, then the chief's position was, well, it's out of his hands. And I think the question now is, and I understand why the Fire and Police Commission took the case, because I think they wanted to make sure that there are other components, whether other officers there, what was happening there. But I think in terms of the employment status of Mr. Mattioli, I think that can be returned to the chief for proper disposition. But again, I am very upset with the fact that he remains on the payroll.
Okay, last question, and we're a little short on time here. How do you get the department to build trust back with the community that it is sworn to protect and serve?
I continue to believe that having our officers live in the city is a part of this. I think that's really a big part of this. But I think that policing is a part of our fabric. We're always going to have a very diverse community. We're always going to have a police department of some form. We have to build that trust, and it gets done on an individual basis. It has to be done, and it's like a marriage. You never stop working at it. You've got to keep working at it.
Okay. Hey, Mayor, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, James. Pleasure to be with you.
The protest reignited the mistrust between law enforcement and the community. Our guest, Sheriff Earnell Lucas, has been on both sides of the issue. Sheriff, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's get started. How does law enforcement build trust when you constantly see videos that show white people fighting with law enforcement officers and they end up arrested, but Blacks are not awarded the same kind of leeway?
Well, it's a constant challenge and struggle for the law enforcement profession. We're charged with every day going out and being at our best, while many of the people that we encounter are at their worst. And by and large, thousands of young men and women go out on a daily basis and do wonderful things, make deposits, as I say, to this bank account of trust that is so important for us in this profession. But it's that one video clip that we see, or that one encounter with the police that goes wrong, that takes that bank account and withdraws everything in there. And now it makes sheriffs and police chiefs' job around the country more challenging. Listen, it stems from communicating with our people that we are held to a higher standard, that people by and large want and need the police in their communities. But they want police to be policing and doing the right things. And so we're working hard here at the sheriff's office. As you well know, when I came in on a goal of restoring honor, integrity, and trust. And while the challenges that we see in Atlanta and Minneapolis and other places around the country makes it more challenging and difficult for us, we're still determined to go out there and earn the public's trust.
What do you need from the community?
I think the thing that we can use most right now, James, I understand where the community is calling for reforms and changes for policing. But what we need is for the people that by and large still support their police to stand up and speak out. Dr. King said that, that we all are caught in this inescapable network of mutuality, James. And so police are a part of this community. Yeah, let's separate the issue of residency and all that kind of thing like that. But by and large, we're here because 18,000 communities across America say we want our own policing, our own type of police department. And so we need understanding. We need people to speak up and speak out. We cannot have it just one way. And then more importantly, we've got to have some understanding of one another. Again, it's a two-way street, and the police are in the community. They're there for the community. And if people reach out to us, by and large, overwhelmingly, I'm certain that law enforcement will reach back.
So, Sheriff, how do you balance your frustrations of the community with your duties for leading the Sheriff's Department?
Well, I'm an eternal optimist. I'm one that's encouraged. Again, when we see the reprehensible act of 4 Minneapolis police officers in taking the life of Mr. George Floyd and all the other acts that we see around the country, again, those things set the profession back. But when people speak up and speak out as they're doing right now all across this country, then that only serves to make us better, to make us listen. And again, that's something that is very critical to us delivering the level of service that people need, is to listen, to hear from the people. I've said that it wasn't enough that people elected me with a goal of change back in November of 18. I need people to engage with us on a daily basis so that we know that we're doing what it is that the people have asked of us. So we're wanting people and we're asking people to engage us so that we can better know and understand what it is that they need from us.
There's been a lot of talk about defunding law enforcement. Is this the right time and the right climate to start talking about that?
I'm going to leave that to those that want to engage in that conversation, in that dialogue. I've been doing real-time assessment of what things we have done over the course of the last 2 or 3 weeks in the course of the disturbances that have broken out in our community and across the country. And I've made some real-time assessments. And are we perfect people? No. But what we are, we're proud professionals who are trying to do the very best we can. And while people are calling for change and they're calling for reorganization and restructuring, there's a time for that. But most importantly, let's have that conversation and that dialogue with us at the table. The old saying is that if you're not in the room, you're on the menu. Let's have that conversation with us at the table and see if we can't find some areas of mutuality and how we move forward from where we are in this current situation.
So you mentioned George Floyd, and just this past week, we've also had another deadly encounter in Atlanta where a man lost his life after a confrontation with police. Why is this something that continues to happen?
Well, as long as there's humans involved in this profession of law enforcement, there's going to be acts and occurrences that we all wish never happened. That's just a fact of life. And how do we address and respond to those challenges and those situations, determine what type of people we are. Again, by and large, police officers come to work every day and want to do a good job and serve the people with honor and dignity. But then there's a very small percentage in our profession who violates that trust, who breaks that oath that they swore to uphold the public trust. And so as a result, it makes all of our work challenging. And so we just have to continue to come out each day and demonstrate that we're a noble profession, that this is a vocation. This is not a job. This is a passion for many of us. I've given 4 decades of my life to this profession. And I'm very proud of the accomplishments that I've made, that we've made. And even just here in the 18 months that we've been in office, the things that we've done to move from where this organization was when we took it over. And so we just have to continue to make progress and build upon the mistakes of the past and help build a better future.
Last question, and I need you to answer this rather quickly. The family of Cesar Stinson, the Milwaukee Police School lobbyist who was killed January 25th by one of your deputies, will that family ever receive justice?
I have every confidence that the criminal justice system will deliver justice to the family of Mr. Stinson, and that, again, that the justice will be had. It was a very unfortunate situation and circumstances, but what we see now is that it's before the courts right now, and I have every confidence that the criminal justice system will deliver for the Stinson family.
Well, thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
As we close tonight, I want to tell you about a webinar we're sponsoring, Beyond the Virus and the Protests. Dr. Kwaku Ramel-Smith and a panel of Black mental health experts and I will discuss tips on how to cope with the stress and anxiety in the crises we all face. That's June 24th at 6 p.m. Look on our website, milwaukeepbs.org, for more information. And happy Juneteenth Day! There's no big celebration this year, but there are a lot of other civic and social happenings going on. So we leave you tonight with some images from previous Juneteenth celebrations. For Black Nouveau, I'm Joanne Williams. Thanks for watching.